Pretty good. Ready. It's 5:05. We're opening up the special study session. Buenas tardes. Good evening, everybody.
Chair.
Microphone.
Your mic is muted,
Is it?
right?
No, bread is hot. Bread is hot.
Hello, testing. I get a little closer. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Good.
Okay. We haven't, do we need to do a roll call for this?
No, it's a study session, so.
Okay.
No pledge
We
allegiance.
don't have
nothing?
that on the,
No, we'll do that at the following one.
Okay, all right. Okay, let's move forward then. Go ahead, Gabe, you want to do the presentation?
okay. All right, I have a presentation. I'm going to go up to the lectern. And this item's for the sidewalk vendor proposed ordinance. I'm going to speak kind of slow because the way that the translator is going to work on this, based on past meetings, it's a little bit different. So I'm going to speak slow, pause after that, and allow them to be able to do the translation in Spanish after
Okay,
I speak.
perfect.
Okay?
All right, perfect.
Okay. Thank you, Chair and Planning Commissioners. This item is the regarding a study session on sidewalk vendor regulations. Do we have our translator online?
Yes, I am in line. I am online interpreting to the Spanish channel. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Thank you.
Yes, we're going to need you translating during the meeting after pauses during the presentation.
Yes, I always do it simultaneously. When you speak, I speak in Spanish into the Spanish channel.
You tell them you need to translate Spanish to the English channel.
Okay, you would need to translate on the English channel for those
Oh, so you want me
present.
to stay on this channel for this presentation?
Yes, because we have a full
Oh, okay.
house. Yes, thank you.
Okay, that's
Thank
fine.
you. Thank you
Yes.
very much. Okay. All right. So some background on this. The state legislature got involved in regarding regulations for sidewalk vendors in 2018.
En relación a la información, hubo regulaciones en 2018 acerca de los vendedores ambulantes relacionado a ese tema.
That law is Senate Bill 946, which...
Esa ley, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Es la ley número 946.
Which allows cities to regulate sidewalk vendors with respect to time, place, and manner.
Que indica que los vendedores ambulantes pueden ser regularizados específicamente en ciertas horas y ciertas formas.
As long as it's related to objective health, safety, and welfare concerns.
Mientras esté relacionado a la seguridad y el bienestar también en relación a la salud que también se pueda tomar en cuenta.
So typically in the past before this law, the city would allow vendors either merchandise or food. It would require you to be able to construct a building or rent a facility in the city on private property to be able to sell food or merchandise.
En otros momentos antiguos, anteriormente se requería que los vendedores tuvieran algún lugar específico donde pudieran vender la comida, un lugar que pudieran rentar o algún lugar cerrado.
So the state legislature, the law that they passed limits what we can do with respect to sidewalk vendors in the public domain.
La legislatura que ha pasado no nos da la oportunidad nosotros poder controlar el dominio público relacionado a los vendedores ambulantes.
Okay. There was also another bill that was passed, which was Senate Bill 972.
También hubo otra ley que pasó al Senado, que es la ley número 972.
Let me go, sorry. And it revised certain equipment requirements needed for sidewalk vendors selling food.
Y hubo ciertas revisiones requiriendo cierto equipo necesario y requisitos para los vendedores ambulantes.
It also expanded the type of food preparation that would be allowed for sidewalk vendors.
También expande el tipo de preparación de comida y las actividades que se permiten para los vendedores ambulantes.
And it was intended to streamline the permitting process for these vendors.
El propósito de esto fue para hacer más fácil el proceso de permisos para estos vendedores.
It also criminalizes violations of the California Retail Food Code.
También decriminaliza violaciones del Código de California relacionado a comida en punto de venta al público.
And so there's quite several requirements from this, and no longer under the state law would it require health permit from the local health enforcement agency.
Hay varios requisitos indicando que ya no requiere I'm sorry, would you mind repeating that? Because I did not get that one.
Would no
Sorry.
longer require you to obtain a health permit from the local health enforcement agency.
Ya no se permite que ustedes necesiten un permiso de salubridad de la agencia local de salud.
It also created something called the Compact Mobile Food Operation.
También ha creado esto que se domina como la operación de comida compacta y móvil.
And that's the facility that operates from an individual or from a push cart stand or display or a pedal-driven cart.
Este es un individual que ya se empuja un carrito o lo maneja con pedales o lo puede mostrar en el público.
Okay, so there's two types of sidewalk vendors under the law. One is a sidewalk vendor that is stationary, meaning a person who sells food or merchandise from a push cart stand, display, wagon, and so forth.
Hay dos tipos de vendedores denominados en este tipo de vendedores ambulantes. Unos son los que tienen un lugar estacionario o algún carrito que estén moviendo estacionario en la acera.
Or a roaming sidewalk vendor, meaning that sidewalk vendor moves from place to place without stopping.
O un vendedor ambulante que se está moviendo en las aceras de lugar a lugar.
Except to complete a transaction.
Excepto cuando tienen que completar una transacción.
So we did some research on what we do allow. So in residential zones, there are some type of commercial operations that are permitted if you get a home occupation permit from the city.
Hicimos una investigación en si tiene cierto permiso la ciudad en relación de ocupación de una vivienda. Hay ciertos permisos que se pueden emitir.
But it's a little bit more strict if you are selling food.
Pero es un poco más estricto si están vendiendo comida.
So one permit that we have is a cottage food operations.
Un permiso que tenemos es una instalación para vender comida.
So there's certain regulations, certain types of food that you can prepare, but it does require you to be 600 feet from another cottage food operator.
Hay ciertos requisitos que sí pueden cumplir con ellos, pero tienen que estar a 600 pies de otro operador que también tenga una instalación similar.
But you do need to get a permit from the city and from the county.
Pero sí necesitan un permiso de la ciudad y del condado.
The other is what's called a micro enterprise home kitchen operation.
Otra operación es la que se denomina como microcompañía, operación de casa en cocina, o cocina en casa, perdón.
The legislature passed a bill, AB 626, that allowed these operations.
La legislatura ha pasado una ley denominada AB 626 que permite este tipo de operaciones.
So essentially, you could prepare meals out of a home and serve them as long as it's limited to 30 meals per day and 60 meals per week.
Sí pueden preparar comidas de su casa, pero una vez que sea limitado a 30 comidas por día y 60 comidas por semana.
Currently, when we researched this with the county, there are only 2 that are these micro enterprise home kitchens.
Hemos investigado en el condado, solamente existen 2 tipos de lugares como este tipo de micro cocinas denominadas.
So these home kitchens, we have to allow under our regulations, subject to the state requirements.
Estas cocinas en casa se pueden dar bajo cierta regulación y requisitos estatales.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought I fixed that. Ice cream truck operators, we do have regulations for them in the city.
Lo que son operadores de camionetas de venta de helados y tenemos ciertas regulaciones al respecto en la ciudad.
This was passed in 2011, and it does require ice cream truck operators to be at least 300 feet from a school or church during operating hours, and also 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after.
Esto pasó en 2011 y tiene que estar separado a 600 pies de una escuela, de un local parecido a este, en este tiempo denominado.
Ice cream truck vendors also cannot operate out of parking lots in a park, playground, or recreational facility.
Los vendedores no pueden operar tampoco en un estacionamiento, en una instalación recreacional o similar.
And there are hours of operations that we enforce.
Y enforzamos ciertas horas de operación.
So this is the only type of operator that we do allow to operate in public areas, like on streets in the city. Currently.
Este es el único tipo de operador que sí permitimos que pueda elaborar en las calles de la ciudad.
So as the Planning Commission, what can the Planning Commission regulate? It can regulate these 3 things. Or cannot regulate. It cannot prohibit sidewalk vending, so we have to allow it.
La Comisión de Planificación en relación a estas cosas no puede prohibir lo que es ventas en las aceras o vendedores ambulantes.
We cannot impose a requirement based on economic competition.
Tampoco podemos nosotros imponer un requisito relacionado a una competencia tipo económica.
Or require that the vendor get approval from another entity that's not the city.
O tampoco podemos requerir que el vendedor tenga que obtener alguna aprobación de otra entidad que no sea gubernamental.
The city can regulate the following list of items. One includes hours of operation. The second includes sanitation requirements.
La ciudad sí puede regular lo que es siguiente, horas de operación y también requisitos de sanitación, de limpieza.
Compliance with Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as requiring them to get a sidewalk vending permit from the city and a business license.
Cumplimiento también con discapacidades, según con americanos relacionado al acto de discapacidades, y también requerir un permiso para vender en la acera y una licencia para tener un negocio.
We can require a California Department of Tax and Fee Administration seller's permit.
También podemos requerir un impuesto al Departamento de California y una tarifa administrativa también para tener un permiso de venta.
Any licenses from the state or from local agencies like the county health department.
O también en licencias ya sea estatales o el condado como el Departamento de Salud, de Salubridad.
And we could require them to provide information on their operations.
Y les podemos requerir también que ellos proveen información acerca de su tipo de operación.
So what I did provide in the staff report is what the other cities do around the valley and to determine who has an ordinance on the books.
Lo que sí, para el reporte del personal he determinado información de otras ciudades alrededor de
Sí.
cómo están operando en este tipo de situaciones en sus libros.
The cities that do have an ordinance include Cathedral City, Desert Hot Springs, Indio, and Palm Springs.
Cathedral City, Indio, Hot Springs y Palm Springs son ciudades que sí tienen este tipo de operación.
So they all have their different standards, and they're all listed in that table.
Todos tienen sus diferentes normas y están listadas en esa tabla que se mostró.
And we have that table available for anyone on the table over there if you'd like to review what those standards are.
Esa tabla está disponible a ustedes si la quieren revisar con detalle, donde las normas están especificadas.
The city did host a community forum at the Coachella Library on September 26th.
En septiembre 26, en la biblioteca de Coachella, hubo un foro para la comunitario.
And there were a mix of advocates for street vendors as well as representatives from local restaurants.
Y también hubo gente representando a los ambulantes, vendedores ambulantes, al igual que restaurantes establecidos locales.
Okay, so now I'll go into the ordinance. And one thing I want to be clear about is I think there's a perception that what we're seeing actually occurring in the city qualifies as a street vendor under state law.
Vamos a especificar de la ordenanza y lo que requiere o describe cuáles son los vendedores ambulantes bajo la ley estatal.
So remember that a street vendor under state law would be allowed to operate in areas that would be considered public, like a sidewalk on the side of a street.
Bajo esa ley, un vendedor ambulante sí tiene la posibilidad de vender en las calles, digamos en las aceras,
Or
junto a la calle,
a public park.
o un parque público.
Okay, so in 2020, when the city was drafting an ordinance, originally it had a cap on the number of vendors that could sell in the city at 50. We're no longer recommending this cap because we don't even think that we can do this under the existing state law.
En 2020, cuando se hizo un borrador de la ordenanza, había un límite de 50, pero basado en esa información reciente, como ley estatal, no podríamos mantener ese tipo de límite como anteriormente.
So this is what the ordinance would require, and in red are some changes that have been recommended since the 2020 draft ordinance.
Esto es lo que se recomienda en esta ordenanza, y en rojo son los cambios que se han recomendado desde 2020 basado en esta ordenanza.
What you would need to get is a business license and a sidewalk vending permit from the city.
Necesitan de la ciudad un permiso de venta y también un permiso de poder vender como vendedor ambulante de la ciudad.
A California seller's permit with sales tax number issued by the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration.
Un permiso para vender bajo las leyes de Hacienda, de los que cobran los impuestos en California, con un número específico de manejo o de certificado.
A driver's license or passport or tax ID number.
Un pasaporte, una licencia para conducir o un número de identificación.
Whatever would be the minimal requirement from the county, either health department permit or food handler's permit.
Lo que requiere el permiso, ya que sea el permiso de salubridad del condado o el permiso de venta al público.
And the site plan showing that the sidewalk vendor would maintain a 36-inch clear distance.
Y también el plano que indica que el vendedor mantendría una distancia de 36 pulgadas de la acera.
Originally, the ordinance would have required an insurance policy, but instead, it's recommended that they provide some kind of indemnification of the city.
Esa ordenanza pedía una póliza de seguro, pero ahora requiere una indemnificación de la ciudad.
Originally, background check was being recommended, but we're recommending to remove that because we think it will deter people from getting that permit.
Originalmente una revisión de antecedentes era algo que se requería, pero lo vamos a eliminar para que no elimine la cantidad de gente que puede aplicar para estos permisos.
So for a stationary vendor, they would be allowed in non-residential and mixed-use zones in the city, and they would have to maintain a 36-inch clear distance along a sidewalk.
Para un vendedor en la ciudad necesitaría 36 pulgadas de la acera, de la calle más bien, y también uso mixto, propiedades de uso mixto.
And away from building entrances. And so the previous ordinance didn't specify a distance, and we thought it needed to be more specific. So we suggested 15. In talking to the building official, it was recommended that 25 be the distance from an entrance because of having to leave a building and a place for refuge during emergencies.
Y también deben estar alejados, según la ordenanza, de entradas a edificios, y no estaba descrito una cantidad específica, pero se recomienda 26 pies, 25 pies en caso que hubiera una emergencia, evacuar un edificio, entrar o salir.
30 feet from a street or highway intersection.
30 pies de la carretera o de una intersección de carretera.
And then not within, the previous ordinance said not within the vicinity of farmer's market, swap meet, or temporary event permit.
La ordenanza anterior indicó no en una vecindad de un mercado para rancheros, de granjeros también, o de un tipo swap meet.
But because it wasn't specific, we thought that would be difficult to enforce. So we want to put a distance of at least 150 feet.
No especificó con especificación precisa, entonces estamos pidiendo nosotros una distancia de 150 pies de este tipo de negocios.
And if you wanted to be a sidewalk vendor, you would have to be within 500 feet of a parking lot.
Y si quieres ser un vendedor en la acera, tendría que estar a 500 pies de un estacionamiento.
So the other requirements that staff is recommending, which is similar to the ice cream truck ordinance, so to be consistent, is that there would be a 300-foot distance from a school when it's in session, and also 30 minutes before it's in session and 30 minutes after.
Se recomienda que estuviera a una distancia de 300 pies, 30 minutos antes de la escuela y 30 minutos después de la escuela, de una escuela, según la ordenanza similar a la de un lugar de venta de helado.
We noticed that other cities have a distance from a freeway on-ramp and off-ramp, and originally we were looking at 30 feet, but in talking to the city engineer, for safety concerns, they would recommend 200 feet.
Generalmente cuando hay ciertas ordenanzas relacionadas a rampas, entradas y salidas, de 30 pies, pero nosotros recomendamos 200 pies.
So the 30-foot distance that's in the ordinance is reflected here from the street intersection. So this is what the corner cutoff area in the ordinance would look like.
La distancia de 30 pies es lo que está relacionado a la intersección y que es como se vería ese tipo de ordenanza.
But the city engineer is actually recommending that distance be 40 feet because the radius of those intersections are actually 40 feet. And so the sidewalk vendor would have to operate outside that triangle area. And here's an example.
El operador entonces tendría que estar operando fuera de esa área, ya que es un ejemplo.
Here's an example what that would look like.
Aquí un ejemplo de cómo se vería.
The sidewalk vendor would have to maintain a 36-inch clear distance or 3 feet for ADA purposes.
Como propósitos de ADA, el vendedor tiene que mantener una distancia de 36 pies.
So most sidewalks are about 6 feet. The widest sidewalks we have are on 6th Street.
Las aceras más anchas que tenemos son las 6 pies, que las tenemos aquí en la ciudad.
As far as parks, there are some regulations, and sidewalk vendors could operate in them, but they would be prohibited under the ordinance with those parks where we have a concessions agreement with any kind of entity, right? So for example, like the soccer leagues, then sidewalk vendors wouldn't be permitted to operate in those parks. Those parks would be Bagduma Park, Rancho Las Flores, and the reason why it's Veterans Park, we do have an agreement with the firehouse, which is located on the same parcel as the Veterans Park. The parks with no agreement would be Avenue 53 Tot Lot, Sierra Vista, Dateland, and the Oro Park.
I'm sorry, Gary, would you mind specifically breaking it into segments? It was a little bit long.
Maybe the big thing to know is where it would not be permitted is Bagduma Park, Rancho Las Flores, and Veterans Park.
No se permite en Bagduma Park, Rancho Las Flores, en Veterans Park, porque generalmente hay ligas de fútbol o hay ciertas concesiones que ya tienen permiso de vender en esos parques. Ahí no se permite dar un permiso.
So we created a map based on direction from City Council of where we thought sidewalk vendors would be able to operate. And so we have this draft map that I'll explain.
Hemos creado un mapa relacionado aquí que hemos desarrollado nosotros a las ventas de vendedores ambulantes y lo vamos a explicar en un momento.
So in yellow reflects all the areas where only roaming sidewalk vendors would be able to operate.
En amarillo se muestra solamente donde los ambulantes que están constantemente ambulando podrían vender en ese tipo de área.
The areas in purple are non-residential districts, and they're areas that are developed, right? So a sidewalk vendor needs to operate in an area that has a sidewalk and is in close proximity to existing parking.
El morado es áreas que están cerca de un estacionamiento y áreas no residenciales donde podrían tener ese permiso para operar.
So most stationary vendors would be able to operate there, and a lot of that would be concentrated on Grapefruit Boulevard and Cesar Chavez Street.
Grapefruit Boulevard y Cesar Chavez Street es donde estarían los vendedores que estarían situados permanentemente sin estar ambulando.
And the parks that are permitted to operate are highlighted here as well.
Y los partes que también se permite están aquí subrayadas.
So some of the other requirements would include restrictions on time, sanitary conditions.
Otro tipo de restricciones también es restricciones en tiempo y también sanitarias.
The sidewalk vendor for a stationary facility would not be able to have tables, chairs, or shade structures.
El vendedor estacionario no puede tener mesas cubiertas de sombra o estructuras.
You wouldn't be able to discharge liquid into the streets or onto any property.
No podrían vaciar líquidos en las calles o en cualquier propiedad.
For roaming sidewalk vendors, here are the operating times, so it'd be limited between 7 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Para los vendedores que están ambulando todo el tiempo en las aceras, pueden operar en estas horas de 7 a.m. a 6 p.m. en áreas no residenciales. Residenciales, perdón.
But roaming vendors would be able to operate between 6 a.m. to 1:30 a.m.
Y los que están ambulando pueden operar de 6 a.m. a 1:30 a.m.
There would be penalties for violating some of the regulations under the ordinance. These are the penalties that would range from $100 from a first violation, $200 for a second violation, and each additional violation would be $500.
Hay ciertas violaciones si no siguen las leyes según las ordenanzas. La primera violación sería $100, la segunda $200 y la tercera sería una violación, una multa de $500.
What we are recommending to add is that we are allowing 2 warnings before the first fine is issued.
Lo que estamos agregando es 2 advertencias antes de que la primera multa será emitida.
What do other cities regulate that we noticed from they regulate proximity to schools, proximity to doorways for businesses, proximity to off-ramps, and then lastly, proximity to another vendor.
Lo que otras ciudades están regulando son la proximidad a escuelas, proximidad a rampas y también algunas instalaciones específicas.
So here are some photos just to highlight what we see going on. So these two photos, I think a lot of people have the impression that these would qualify as sidewalk vendors, but they do not, and I'll explain.
En estas fotos que ven aquí, quizá gente piense que los ambulantes podrían calificar en estas fotos, pero realmente no es así y ahorita explicaré.
So these two are operating on private property and not in the public areas along streets, along a sidewalk.
Esos dos están operando en propiedad privada y no en las calles o en las aceras.
They have tables, chairs, and a shade structure, which under our draft ordinance would not be permitted.
Tiene una mesa, tiene una silla, tiene una cubierta de sombra que en la ordenanza que vamos a poner como borrador no se permite.
So if the ordinance was adopted, what you see in these pictures would not be permitted in the city if it was taking place on private property.
Una vez que se emite la ordenanza, esto no se permitiría porque estarían en propiedad privada.
Here's another scenario. This is actually in the county, but this is on an unimproved lot. There's no sidewalk. It's actually on the private property.
Aquí es otro condado que no está en una acera, realmente están en una propiedad privada, como pueden ver.
There are shade structures, tables, and chairs.
Hay mesas, hay sillas y también estructuras de sombra.
For all those reasons, it would not be permitted at a location like that.
Por esos motivos no se permitirían ese tipo de local.
Here's another scenario. This is a photo taken from Los Angeles, and this would technically be a sidewalk vendor.
Esa es otra foto que se tomó en Los Ángeles y técnicamente sería un vendedor que vende en la acera.
They're located a good distance from the street intersection.
Están localizados a una buena distancia de la intersección de la calle.
But where they would not be compliant is they have shade structures, tables, and they have chairs.
Pero en donde no tienen cumplimiento, no están cumpliendo al tener sillas, mesas y estructura de sombra.
Here's another scenario off of Avenue 52. In this scenario, the vendor selling fruit. With this scenario, because they are operating in the public right-of-way, right, which is where a sidewalk vendor could operate. But I mentioned earlier that stationary sidewalk vendors are only permitted in commercial districts.
Aquí estamos en un escenario en la avenida 52, que es un vendedor que está vendiendo fruta, pero solamente se permite en la vía pública cuando es un distrito comercial.
This is a residential district.
En este caso es un distrito residencial.
So only roaming vendors would be permitted in neighborhoods.
Solamente vendedores ambulantes podrían permitirse en este tipo de vecindades.
So other than that, I just wanted to highlight one of the things back in 2020 that the City Council wanted staff to do was look at a more holistic effort for this ordinance.
Una cosa que quiero ver más en 2020, queríamos ver una forma más holística, que la comisión pudiera ver esta situación de cómo se podría conducir.
So there are things the city wants to do to help sidewalk vendors that want to grow their business and transition into brick and mortar facilities, and we're working on that right now.
Y la ciudad quiere ayudar a aquellos ambulantes, vendedores ambulantes que quieren comenzar a vender, y eventualmente quieren tener un sitio donde pudieran estar ellos. Es algo que estamos tratando de elaborar.
And we are applying for grants to be able to build those facilities and develop those training programs.
Y estamos aquí aplicando para subvenciones para desarrollar esos programas de entrenamiento y que puedan ser disponibles
So if there's
en instalaciones.
if there are questions about it, we do have our economic development director here that can explain that if there are questions.
Si hay preguntas, tenemos aquí el director de Desarrollo Económico presente en caso que hubiera preguntas.
So for the Planning Commission, the City Council wanted the Planning Commission to consider this ordinance and provide suggestions, discuss this. You will be making a recommendation in the future based on feedback today, but we want to be able to hear your feedback and then also allow the public to be able to provide testimony if they would like.
El Concilio de la Ciudad quería que el Concilio de Planificación dé un informe y dirección en relación a esta ordenanza, y es algo que también tenemos aquí el público que esté presente para participar en esto.
Chair, I have a recommendation because we do have a public hearing item on the regular Planning Commission agenda. So if you guys can limit your discussion until 6 p.m., and then if there's anybody from the public that wants to discuss the sidewalk vending, we can do that at the regular PC meeting during the public comments section.
Okay, so just go ahead and, we got 20 minutes.
Yeah, just so the public understands, you'll have an opportunity to speak, but they'll be at the meeting that starts at 6 under the public comment section of that one. Since it's a non-agenda discussion and the sidewalk vending is not on that agenda, so if you bear with us, it's just because we have public hearing items on that agenda that we need to get to. So if you could please limit your discussion until 6 p.m. and then we can start the other meeting and give the public an opportunity to speak then.
Okay, it's 5:41. We're going to open up the public hearing. A couple of questions, Gabe. Do we have a copy of SB, the ordinance, state ordinance?
We do, yeah. So we provided those 2 Senate bills in the staff reports.
Okay, because obviously the state is going to supersede the city municipality, so I'd like to get a draft of it to see where we're at. One of the questions too on the license and passports, are we recommending that they present a passport?
Some level of identification, and so we realized there might be concern if someone was undocumented that they wouldn't be able to provide certain documentation, but there's the possibility you can get a driver's license without having being undocumented and then also having a passport.
Okay, because I just wanted to make it clear that we're a sanctuary city. We got to make sure that we have total access to somebody that doesn't have a passport.
I'm sorry, this is interpreter. I just had a question. Did you want me to interpret what is going on now, or should I go into the Spanish channel?
I would leave that up to the chair.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to interpret. That way there's some clarity on it.
So I would just recommend that we'll have the member to pause and keep some of your comments short.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Director, I have some comments. First and foremost, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I know this is a hot topic.
Señor director, tengo un par de comentarios. Antes que nada, muchas gracias a todos por presentarse el día de hoy. Sabemos que es un tema muy importante en este momento.
Yes, and I want to highlight section 12.50.030, the permits required. We struck through the language of general liability.
Quiero indicar que se ha estructurado el lenguaje o la cláusula de responsabilidad general en la cláusula ya indicada.
Can you please, Mr. Director, share with me your thought process and why that language was struck?
El señor director, ¿puede compartir por qué cambió esa cláusula y comparte su proceso conmigo?
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. This was recommended based on some complaints we received on the costs related to getting a permit, right? So if you need to get insurance, that was presented as an impediment.
Señor vicepresidente, sí fue un requisito en relación al permiso y el costo que tomaría llevar a cabo este tipo de permisos, y también un impedimento podría ser el seguro.
I would advise that the language be reinstated and that we ask for general liability. Only makes sense and is fair that the rest of our businesses are actually brick and mortar businesses that are in business actually are required to have general liability. So I would caution the policymaker here to strike the language. So in full transparency and full fairness with what's going on between both entities, whether it be vendors outside of brick and mortar or brick and mortar restaurants that we do have general liability.
Pido que la cláusula se reinstale para que pueda haber una responsabilidad general, al igual que los negocios que existen físicos y construidos, y que se vuelva a reinstalar para que todos tengan que cumplir con ese punto.
Second comment is section 12.50.100, the penalties. Starting with A, after 2 warnings, I want to know the thought process behind the 2 warnings.
En relación a la cláusula mencionada, también quiero saber cuál es cómo se llegó a pensar en 2 advertencias antes de llegar a las multas.
The concern was being very punitive right away. The thought is to provide a lot more education initially for anyone that might be a violator. And then, go ahead.
Nos dimos cuenta que la preocupación era un poco punitiva porque queríamos un poco más de educación a la gente que pudiera violar esos puntos.
I would agree, but in all fairness to, again, our brick and mortar restaurants, I would like to see that warning reduced to 1.
Estoy de acuerdo en eso, pero para proteger también a los lugares ya establecidos, quisiéramos reducirlo a 1 advertencia.
And that would be the same for B, item B as well, under the same subsection.
Eso sería también en el artículo número B, en la misma subsección.
And lastly, my last comment is a pathway to brick and mortar. I want to congratulate all our stakeholders in our community and those who choose to invest in our community, i.e. restaurants and stakeholders who've decided to invest in our community in restaurants, right? I know it's a labor and it's a big effort. And I would like to see a program where we promote street vendors either to brick and mortar and or lunch or trucks, right, or food trucks. But ultimately, I'd like to see a pathway to brick and mortar rather sooner than later. So I would suggest that we limit the renewal of licenses to street vendors, right? There'd be a cap, but there also institute a plan for them to be on that path to brick and mortar. So ultimately, the end goal here is to occupy vacant facilities throughout the city. So go ahead.
Quiero felicitar a todos los que han llegado aquí a Coachella y han invertido en poner negocios, establecerlos. Y queremos también indicar lo mismo para los ambulantes que eventualmente tengan la decisión y la habilidad de poder establecerse también, negocios establecidos, y poner un límite en las licencias, las renovaciones que estén limitadas y tratar de impulsar a que los vendedores traten de tener lugares bien establecidos.
And now I don't know what that pathway looks like, right? And I don't know how long it's going to take for a street vendor to ultimately reach that goal of brick and mortar. But I believe we do have some testimony businesses who once started as a cottage kitchen and ended up in a brick and mortar, right? And so it's a very realistic goal to achieve, right? Because the data's there. Now, ultimately, the city and this program is going to have to do some work, right, and monitor, and perhaps they could work with local universities, such as with Commissioner Fonseca has. He's got a bunch of college graduates that are professionals looking for jobs, and perhaps they can work on business programs, right, or some sort of outlines that help these students and help these small businesses here get on board here.
El comisionado Fonseca está trabajando con varios estudiantes de universidades que podrían ayudar o asistir en que este tipo de negocios eventualmente puedan establecerse. No sé el proceso, el tiempo que puedan lograr, pero tenemos que impulsarlos para que puedan lograr llegar a ese punto.
Thank you so much. Those are my comments.
Muchas gracias a mis comentarios.
No, I think it makes sense, but I think if you look at it realistically, some of the street vendors are a little more challenged. Obviously, everybody has a humble beginning. They start selling in the streets. eventually, get a restaurant. But I think we, like Gabe was saying, that, and our Economic Development Director, Selena, that, we're looking at possible funding, and I think we should offer that hand to see how many we could actually, we can assist to actually get an establishment where they could create their own little restaurant. And, everybody has a humble beginning, and we have to respect that and try to assist everybody we can to get to that goal.
Como hemos indicado nosotros anteriormente, yo quería indicar también el tema de que hay ciertos vendedores que comienzan en un momento humilde, no como aquellos que ya tienen sus lugares bien establecidos. Entonces, ver alguna forma que los pudiéramos ayudar para que puedan establecerse.
I agree.
I have a comment regarding the recommendations for the time frame for the vendors. What was the time frame again? You said from 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. in the morning?
Tengo una recomendación el
I'd
tiempo,
like to
el
get a
tiempo que pueden
clarification
vender.
on that, and I'd like to know why that time frame until 1 a.m.
Quiero indicar por qué de 6 a.m. hasta la 1:30 a.m. I believe it was 1:30 a.m. I'm sorry.
So the clips,
Yeah, so 1:30
To 1
is
a.m.?
for the non-residential areas for stationary and roaming sidewalk vendors. I'm not sure what the rationale, right? I'm assuming it's later for non-residential areas and then earlier for neighborhoods. But that timeframe could change if we needed it to.
I'd like to have some considerations on that, let's reevaluate the timeframes for that.
Too earlier?
Yeah.
Okay.
we're gonna.
Quiero que.
We'll have a
I'm sorry.
discussion.
Yeah, we'll have this discussion so we can figure all that out and then present it to the city council.
Queremos reevaluar el horario porque parece que es demasiado tarde, hasta la 1:30, y es algo que tenemos que ver y platicarlo nosotros para referirlo al consejo o al concilio de la ciudad.
Another consideration is regarding the pathway for, mobile vendors and for sidewalk vendors to go into brick and mortar. We do have the Resilience Center, so I'd like to explore the thoughts on, helping those vendors. They can use that facility, that space to provide their services.
También tenemos el centro de resiliencia que se puede ayudar a estos vendedores a darles información y educación de cómo pueden llegar a eventualmente tener instalaciones ya fijas.
I think where we could start with Bagduma Park. I think we have a certified kitchen at Bagduma Park, don't we, Selena? So I think
Tenemos
we
una
should make
cocina
that
certificada en
accessible
Bagduma
to the
Park.
vendors where, if they need to cook something to sell it out in the streets, we should give
I
the
don't think
public.
that's allowed, right?
Para que
I
sea
don't think
accesible
right
a los
now, but
vendedores si
there's-
tienen que cocinar en
there's
esta
plans
cocina.
That Selena could probably talk to, we're applying for funding to make that happen.
Yeah, we'll put a structure together in a calendar, and then we could, give the public access to the kitchen. So, you need a certified kitchen, they can go out and sell food in the public.
Well, there's already a kitchen there at the center there, right? Correct?
Yeah, actually, there is a commercial kitchen at Bagduma Community Center, and so we have proposed that in our TCC, or Transformative Climate Communities proposal, to actually make that a demonstration commercial kitchen. We will hear about that decision on December 1st, so that is forthcoming. We're very looking forward to that. And as Director Perez mentioned, we do have in that same application, a business incubation program in TCC on 6th Street. So we will have about 6 storefronts that one will serve as a business incubator, and the rest will be, storefronts available to people who wish to become brick and mortar, business persons there. And also the CRC, or the Community Resilience Center, the former Hidden Harvest building, that will completely have a food lab type emphasis. So we're really looking forward to hearing about that. We won't know until April of 2024. So in the meantime, we will continue working with you all on those efforts. And I also want to add that we also have a displacement avoidance plan that has been, it's in draft form right now, but if we do again get funded on December 1st, we will actually put that into action, and we will take all of this feedback that we're getting here today so that we have, policies that the council and the planning commission can consider, and so we don't displace anyone, including street vendors or our restaurant owners or any other business, including low-income families.
Okay, thank you, Selena.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's important that the city empowers all our, especially street vendors. Everybody has a humble beginning. Everybody that has a successful business, started, selling food. And we just need to make it accessible to the whole community across the board.
Right, and I agree, but we also really need to make it fair for our business owners who are already here and who are investing their dollars currently, and who are actually, those are community stakeholders, right? It's like the majority of the people that I see coming as food vendors are from out of town, and they don't make their living here in Coachella. They don't reside here, and I've seen very minimal Coachella residents being street vendors, right? And so I think that if you want to come and do business from out of town in Coachella, I believe that you should have to obtain the proper business requirements and or licenses and or general liabilities as any other vendor in our city.
Okay, so I think that we should, we could narrow the ordinance that has to be a Coachella residence.
I'm not sure if we can do that.
Can we do that, or?
We can't, no.
We can add, I believe, a provision that indicates
Condition
something
of-
about roaming vendors, right? Or outside vendors
So,
encroachment.
so limiting to just residents, it's not possible. I think there'll be a lot of constitutional issues if you decide to go that route. And you would open up the city for legal liability. So
Okay.
That
Perfect.
is not recommended.
Let's do it.
However, we can have permits for those that are outside vendors, like, right? Other cities have done that.
Yeah, I would have to look at that. Like, are you talking about different
So
requirements
for
for?
example, they're not city, Coachella City, residents or, already have a firm business. They would, if they're from, let's say, Los Angeles, because we have a lot of people coming from
Yeah.
Los Angeles, that they would be required to have a particular permit and follow the same rules.
I would have to look at that and get back to you. I don't know any city that has different requirements for
think it's
different
People.
residents and non-residents.
So if they're taxpayers in the city of Coachella, would it make sense they would have access to whatever perks the city is providing?
Can we do something like that? Like, so for instance, if you are a resident of Coachella and you apply for a license, is there a way to incentivize those people first, right?
I think so, right?
Like I said, I would have to look at that. I don't think that any city has given preferential treatment to residents. And like I said, that would definitely open up some constitutional questions that I would have to look at and get back.
Could we get some legal opinions, Council?
Yes, you definitely can.
Thank you so much.
I have a comment regarding the permits and residents and non-residents. I do see that Palm Springs has a different fee for permits when it comes to residents to non-residents. And on our section, it says it's non-proposed.
That's constitutional.
So is that something we can propose as well, that if a resident will have a permit, like any permit, it will have a different fee regarding to someone coming from Los Angeles, will have a different fee?
Yeah, so I could definitely take a look at that. I'll take a look at the Palm Springs one and see, Palm Springs is also one of our clients, so I'll talk to their
Okay.
city attorney and make sure that they haven't been challenged or.
Yeah, let's get an
So-
opinion on it from legal counsel and then.
Mr. Director, what's the logic behind our fee schedule? Just obtain?
Just to at least get, most of this is pretty low cost already.
Yeah.
To be able to get the permit. I know one of the letters we received from, one of the groups that provided the staff report wants it to be like $25, but I do feel like it's already low, it's recommended. The other cities, we haven't determined what our fee would be, right? So we still would need to do that by resolution. So the planning commission, you can recommend a fee for us to look at, but this outlines on this sheet what other cities are doing right now.
I think, Director, we'll have, further conversation about all these different items and, we could, we'll figure all that out.
Okay, and just one thing I do want to share, and I know we're gonna have to go to the other meeting, and then we'll have the public comment, if people want to comment them.
Yeah.
There is an interest, and we've talked to both those supporting, or advocates for the sidewalk vendors, and then those that are advocating on behalf of restaurants. And the people that we've been talking to, advocating for restaurants, isn't just for restaurants, right? They have a concern also for the sidewalk vendors, and it's more about this issue of being fair. So one of the things that they're interested in having is an ordinance adopted sooner than later, because we cannot regulate anything right now. Until we have an ordinance, we can't regulate it. Some of the concerns that have been expressed to us that you've seen in the photos, most of those sidewalk vendors will not exist in those locations. It will have to locate in those areas that we designate, right? And so the sooner that we adopt an ordinance, the sooner actually we can enforce something.
I think what's important to understand is that, we're dealing with state law, and obviously state law supersedes, the county and municipalities. So we have to understand that whatever we do it in the guideline of whatever the SB, whatever that is, was passed by the state. So that, we need to make that very clear.
I believe we are. So one of the things that I would like to see, especially for outside vendors, specifically for outside vendors, right? Those people who come from afar to do business in Coachella. I'd like to see a permit maybe around like, $2,500 annually for someone like them.
Okay. All right, we're gonna finish up this public hearing. Son las 6, vamos a comenzar otra junta. If anybody has any comments, we could, you can talk during the, yeah, you gotta wait till we go to the public. When we have public comment, we'll open up, and anybody has anything to say or wanna mention something, we'll open up. You'll have 3 minutes to address the commission, okay?
Do you want to close the?
No, so it's not a public hearing item, so if you could just adjourn the meeting and then
Okay.
reconvene the regular planning commission.
We're gonna terminate this,
Close the meeting.
close the meeting, and we're gonna go on with